be.
Cannot you tell that? Every fool can tell that.
Murder most foul.
Dead! For a ducat!
It is the year 1564, and in a little hole in the middle of England called Stratford-upon-Avon, a child is born by the name of William Shakespeare. Yeah, we're starting pretty deep in the past for this one. In spite of being one of the great pillars of Western literature, we know shockingly little of the everyday life of old Billy Shakes. We probably know more about Pharaoh Ramses II, who, sure, was one of the greatest warrior kings of one of the greatest empires of all time, but also predates Shakespeare by nearly 3,000 years. What we do know about the man has been pieced together over the centuries from fragments of church documents, legal records, and testimony from his friends and enemies as he made a name for himself as an actor and playwright in Elizabethan London. And to be honest, if you want a lecture on that, there's plenty of better places for it than a channel focused on obscure video games. You could spend hours and hours learning about the man and the world he lived in, and it's a pretty fun historical and literary rabbit hole to go down. I recommend it. Later. Yet none of it can truly answer a fundamental question. How could one man, growing up in a place with extremely limited educational resources by modern standards, with a sewer system that wasn't so much a system as it was a faint hope that your waste would end up elsewhere somehow, and serving a queen who maintained her perfect pale complexion through the use of lead-based makeup, how could he, using merely quill and parchment, write so many works that will probably outlast any statue of Ozymandias? I don't subscribe to the great man theory, and Shakespeare has been mythologized to near divinity, but as a fan of a good story, as someone with a deep respect for the written word, it's difficult to read his works and not think of him as some kind of magical once-in-a-millennium intellect that got lucky enough to be born near the conditions and people who would support and encourage his talents. He broke new ground writing about the human condition with what was then an unheard of level of psychological depth and emotional weight while doing it all in blank verse. I don't think I have the cognitive capacity to explain to you just how good Shakespeare really is. This isn't just a guy who wrote a masterpiece or two. The man made comedies, tragedies, histories, and romances that are straight up all-timers. And I do mean all-timers. He has a vocabulary that rivals that of the fabled poet Aesop Rock, being the first recorded instance of phrases like one fell swoop, break the ice, and pound of flesh, and words like fashionable, majestic, eyeball, and bedroom. And trust me when I say I'm just barely scratching the surface of his genius here. Just imagine if Alexei Pajitnov designed a dozen more games after Tetris that were all in their own entirely unique way considered as candidates for Game of the Century instead of Hatris or Faces Tris 3. Even if you've never had to read Shakespeare in high school, it's impossible that you haven't seen or read or experienced something influenced by his sonnets or King Lear, Othello, Macbeth, The Tempest, Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and so on and so forth. And Hamlet is quite possibly the most influential of them all. Like many of Shakespeare's plays, it's not an entirely original work, tracing its roots back to a 12th century Scandinavian legend concerning a prince who feigns madness in order to get out of a bind. But Shakespeare modified and expanded this into a grand epic, a sweeping tale of revenge, by far his longest work, requiring Londoners to stand in the mud and stare at these actors for 4 entire hours. And they did. Repeatedly. Therefore, it comes as no surprise that references to characters, events, even just lines from the play are beyond numerous even to the modern day. Which brings us from the early 17th century to the mid-20th. Kenneth Charles Branagh was born in 1960 to a working-class Protestant family in Belfast, Northern Ireland, although they moved to England to escape the Troubles before he hit his teens. In his introduction to his screenplay of Hamlet, he credits watching Derek Jacobi as the Danish prince in a stage production with unlocking both his love for Shakespeare and acting at a very young age. A career on the stage and on the screen soon followed, with his 1989 directorial debut Henry V earning him both a Best Director and Best Actor Oscar nomination. 1993's Much Ado About Nothing was also a critical and financial success, cementing Branagh as the Shakespeare film adapter of the age. But his success was not universal. In 1994, he directed Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, starring in it as the Doctor himself alongside Robert De Niro as the monster, and it didn't set the critics on fire. The year after, he co-starred with Lawrence Fishburne in Castle Rock Entertainment's production of Shakespeare's Othello as the villainous Iago, receiving particular praise for his portrayal. His relationship with Castle Rock continued with In the Bleak Midwinter, a small-scale black and white comedy about a group of misfits coming together to attempt to stage a small charity production of Hamlet. Apparently, Castle Rock enjoyed working with Branagh enough to make his dream come true. They gave him $18 million to direct his very own version of Hamlet, the work that had inspired him so much many years before. Lots of pressure there, but also what an opportunity. So K. Branagh set to work on creating the grandest adaptation of what many consider to be Shakespeare's greatest play. He would make just one big change, which is to set it in the 19th century, in part for its visual splendor, in part because it would be more relatable to a modern audience, and in part because it was a century fraught with royal family drama that would enhance the story. Everything else he would leave as the original, including, crucially, the script. It had never been filmed unabridged before, but Branagh was set on doing the whole 4-hour-long eternity version, as it is known among theater nerds, not willing to compromise on scenes and lines he considered crucial to understanding the story and characters. The film would have a star-studded international cast composed of Derek Jacobi, Kate Winslet, Charlton Heston, Robin Williams and Billy Crystal somehow, Julie Christie, Nicholas Farrell, Jack Lemmon, a blink-and-you'll-miss-it appearance by Judi Dench, and of course, Kenneth himself as Hamlet. Now, Branagh was 35 when filming the movie, which to me seemed rather old to play the young prince at first. The play explicitly puts Hamlet's age at 30, though his behavior and other characteristics would put him more in the early to mid-20s range. Branagh had played the character on stage and for radio before, and had himself noticed that it takes a certain familiarity and experience with the role to truly understand and communicate the depth of the character. For whatever it's worth, he does a fine job, and the oldest person to ever play Hamlet was some actor named Ian McKellen, maybe you've heard of him, who portrayed him in a 2021 production in the UK at the young age of 82. Good luck arguing that he wasn't a good fit for the role. The film premiered on Christmas Day 1996, and it is great. Really, actually great. It succeeds spectacularly at being a ghost story, a romance, a family drama, a royal epic, and even a political thriller. That $18 million went directly into the spectacular sets and costuming, and every penny of it was used beautifully. The cinematography is literally sweeping and grand, with the camera often dancing around the characters and through the sets in smooth motions and long single takes. All the actors give it their all. Even Robin Williams somehow works as the foolish Osric. Kenneth Branagh hired Brian Blessed, this Brian Blessed.
We should no care about Nabu.
This Brian Blessed.
Do you want me to be honest or tactful?
Tactful, I think.
Tell him to get stuffed!
This Brian Blessed. As the ghost of King Hamlet, and had him whisper every single line. And it works! That takes a level of confidence in your own dedication to the craft that I can't even begin to comprehend. The soundtrack composed by Patrick Doyle is haunting and emotionally resonant, used at just the right moments, punctuated by utter silence or just the ambient sound of the castle whenever necessary. And of course I can't play a single note of it in this video for fear of the copyright hounds, so you'll just have to take my word for it. But yeah, the film gets a strong recommend from me. Pencil in that 4 hours, maybe 5 so you can pause and take notes every now and then. Definitely have the subtitles on, but don't be intimidated by the early modern English of Shakespeare's time. It may be extra poetic and flowery for the stage, but it's not completely alien to us modern English speakers, and one of the things that makes Shakespeare so brilliant is that there's built-in redundancies and a strong emotional thrust that will help you understand the gist of a character's speech even if you don't understand all the words. And it's all underlined very effectively by Branagh's direction. It's a large film, based on a large play, and it indulges in its size with measure. Excessive and loud, or minimal and quiet exactly when it needs to be. I had a great time watching it. Bring snacks. Now, being 4 whole ass hours long and having a limited release, Hamlet did not smash the box office, but it was critically praised and is now considered not just one of Branagh's best films, not just one of the greatest and certainly most complete adaptations of Hamlet, but one of the top Shakespeare films of all time. I think we can all agree that Branagh achieved his goal. 1996 also saw the release of Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet, which also retained the original Elizabethan language of that play, but contrasted it with a radically altered setting of a modern fantasy West Coast America. This resulted in it being a pretty huge critical and box office hit. This film, which entirely coincidentally starred Leonardo DiCaprio, who would have a fateful encounter with Hamlet's Kate Winslet not a year later on the Atlantic, received an interactive multimedia CD-ROM companion called William Shakespeare's Romeo plus Juliet, an interactive trip to Verona Beach. It is a very stylish, very mid-90s compilation of movie clips and character bios. Castle Rock, perhaps seeing the trend, perhaps seeking to outdo 20th Century Fox, dedicated some budget to a Hamlet CD-ROM all their own. To do this, they commissioned historical multimedia CD-ROM studio Pantheon Productions, which leads us to the third character of our play. Jean-Pierre Isbouts was born in Eindhoven, the Netherlands, and as a young man fell in love with 2 things: history and the humanities, and filmmaking. He got himself a PhD in New York, got professional experience in filmmaking by directing Leonard Nimoy in a segment about Vincent van Gogh, and then in the late 80s ended up working for the one company that Eindhoven is known for: Philips. You may remember Philips for inventing the audio cassette and co-developing the compact disc along with Sony, and at this time they were building an interactive multimedia empire powered by the CD-ROM and to a lesser extent the CDI format. And the CD-ROM is a crucial component of this tale, because its incredible capacity combined with the accelerating power of the personal computer led to an explosion of educational multimedia discs and cinematic adventure games in the early 90s. We're talking The Seventh Guest, we're talking Myst, we're even talking Hell, a cyberpunk thriller. New things were becoming possible, and while Isbouts' role as managing director of Philips Media Europe was more supervisory in nature, and while Philips was more interested in the educational market, the line between interactive multimedia educational product and adventure game was sometimes blurry. Feeling the need to strike out on his own, in 1994 Isbouts returned to the US and founded Pantheon Productions, his very own interactive multimedia production studio in Santa Monica, California. Still on good terms with Philips, their first projects were PC ports of CDI discs about Van Gogh and French Impressionists. 1996 saw the release of Greatest Moments of Our Time, an interactive historical video compendium all about crucial moments and people of the 20th century, by French publisher M Interactive. In 1996, Pantheon also produced Charlton Heston's Voyage Through the Bible in Old and New Testament versions, which I think speaks for itself and was apparently quite successful. This collaboration with Heston, who portrayed the Player King in Branagh's film, and Isbouts' bona fides as a historian, may have been what attracted Castle Rock to Pantheon to produce a Hamlet CD-ROM, and Castle Rock was apparently a joy to work with. They provided Pantheon with all the footage of the movie, including stacks of outtakes, so that they could craft an original spin on the film that would work in an interactive medium, a version of Hamlet where solving the puzzles could lead to a happier ending, and the player could maybe learn a thing or two along the way. It was a serendipitous culmination of a number of technologies. The brand new Motion Pixels codec allowed for high quality, for the time, full-screen video at a relatively small file size. Macromedia Director allowed a team of multimedia producers to quickly and easily author puzzles and arcade gameplay. 3D modeling software allowed for detailed recreations of the movie sets. And M Interactive would distribute the game on behalf of Castle Rock and Pantheon on shiny CD-ROMs to contain it all. We have traveled through time from the 1500s all the way to 1997. This is the year of William Shakespeare's Hamlet, a murder mystery. Hamlet, a murder mystery, plays with the narrative of the film it is based on, and cannot be properly understood without seeing the film or at least having an understanding of the plot of the play. So, to refresh your memory, or if you're entirely unfamiliar, I now present to you a brief interlude. Alien Bob's Kenneth Branagh's William Shakespeare's The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Spoilers for a 400-year-old story that's one of the most famous and celebrated pieces of literature in the English language. Alright, gotta set the stage here. The Kingdom of Denmark in the mid-19th century. Kind of. Some time ago, King Hamlet defeated Norway's King Fortinbras in a duel, and through that act honorably acquired some significant parts of Norwegian territory. King Fortinbras was succeeded by his ineffectual elderly brother, and Fortinbras Jr. has grown into a brash and hot-blooded young adult seeking vengeance and the restoration of his realm. But now King Hamlet himself has died, replaced by his own brother Claudius, who took not just his throne, but also his wife, Queen Gertrude. Young Prince Hamlet is not amused, sulking around the palace just because his dad died and 2 months later his mom married his uncle. As the story starts, royal sentries at the gates of the Palace of Elsinore witness an apparition of the late king's ghost and bring in Hamlet's closest friend Horatio to confirm. They agree it's probably a good idea to tell Hamlet about this. Meanwhile, Polonius, Claudius's most trusted advisor, has a sit-down with his adult children. To his son Laertes, who resides in France but returned to Denmark for the royal wedding, he gives some fatherly guidance, culminating in probably the best advice anyone could give. This, above all, to thine own self be true. To his daughter Ophelia he says, stay the hell away from Hamlet. That boy ain't right. That same night, Hamlet chases the ghostly apparition into the woods, where it fully reveals itself as indeed the spirit of his late father, whispering to him of murder most foul. He was killed by his own brother, Claudius, and unless Hamlet avenges him, he'll be stuck in purgatory for all eternity. He must spare Gertrude, though, as she is innocent in all this. Spurred into inaction, Hamlet tells Horatio his grand plan. He's gonna just act a little loopy for a bit while he finds evidence to confirm the ghost story. And he gets right to it. Ophelia goes to her father, crying about how Hamlet was being just a weirdo freak, and not the fun kind. Of course, now Polonius has figured it out immediately. He told Ophelia to back off of Hamlet, and now Hamlet's gone mad due to a broken heart. Meanwhile, Claudius has summoned 2 of Hamlet's college buddies, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and tasks them to act as his little spies and figure out why Hamlet is behaving the way he is. Claudius receives good news from the King of Norway. Young Fortinbras has been reprimanded and will have to take his army to Poland instead, with permission to cross through Danish territory. Hamlet meets up with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and is immediately onto them, mocking them with his relentless wit. But they have brought a troupe of actors with them to Elsinore, which excites Hamlet greatly. He comes up with a plan to prove the ghost accusation. He will have the actors do a play that ends in a murder very similar to his dad's, poison in the ear, and see how Claudius reacts. The play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. But Polonius still thinks all of Hamlet's antics are related to Ophelia, so he orders her to return all of Hamlet's love letters so that he and Claudius can see Hamlet's reaction from a distance. As Hamlet enters the State Hall, he looks deeply into one of its many mirrors and ponders on the meaning of life and death. To be or not to be. His reaction to Ophelia is less than ideal, and he gets a bit rough with her, both verbally and physically. Is this true madness? Or is he just so committed to the bit that he's willing to mistreat his love in such a way? It's kind of hard to tell. Anyway, the play happens, and the players act out the murder of a king by poison in the air. Claudius gets up and leaves in a huff, and Hamlet's all like, "Gotcha, motherfucker." Paraphrasing, of course. Claudius retreats to the confessional in the palace chapel, half praying, half realizing that he cannot truly repent for his great sin without giving up everything he's gained. What he doesn't know is that Hamlet is right there and considers shoving his dagger straight into the king's skull. But he holds off, realizing that if he kills Claudius right now as he is praying, he might go to heaven, which would be a very counterproductive kind of revenge. Hamlet goes to have a word with his mother, still just so pissed off at her for moving on so quickly, and it almost gets violent again. The queen screams for assistance, and a figure behind the curtain yelps. Hamlet, thinking it's Claudius, rushes to the curtain, takes out his dagger, and stabs, until the figure is lying dead on the floor. But it's not Claudius, it's Polonius. Hamlet doesn't care at all, letting the body bleed out while still urging his mother to please stop sharing a bed with her dead husband's brother. And then the ghost appears in the room, but only to Hamlet, and he tells him, "Dude, leave your mom alone and get to work. Stop wasting time, please."
So Hamlet hides Polonius's body and gleefully jokes about it with Claudius. The king is upset but also afraid. Not only does he suspect that Hamlet knows what happened, but clearly he's willing to kill. He tells Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to take Hamlet with them on a boat trip to England. He also gives them a sealed letter addressed to the King of England, telling him to kill Hamlet upon his arrival. So off Hamlet goes on the trip, encountering the Norwegian army crossing Danish territory on its way to Poland, and, inspired by his counterpart Fortinbras's sheer brazenness, realizes he himself has accomplished nothing useful so far, and resolves to take action to restore his family name. But not all is well back at Elsinore. Polonius's death has sent Ophelia spiraling into madness. Actual madness, not like Hamlet's little act. Laertes returns from France with an angry mob and storms the castle, demanding justice for his father's slaying. Claudius is all like, "Don't look at me, man. This is all that annoying kid Hamlet's doing. But you don't have to worry about him anymore." Which is what he thought until he receives a letter from Hamlet saying he'll be back in a few days. Horatio gets a similar letter, urging him to meet at the graveyard soon. And then tragic news arrives. Ophelia escaped from her padded cell, and, in her madness, wandered into the woods and drowned, probably by her own hand. Laertes has now lost both his father and his dear sister, and Hamlet is to blame for both.
At the cemetery, Hamlet reunites with Horatio, and, confronted with the skull of the former court jester, once again contemplates the nature of death. Alas, poor Yorick. Soon he learns the grave being dug is that of poor Ophelia, and as her funeral begins, he and Laertes have a bit of a scuffle. It's not a particularly dignified moment for either of them. Back at the palace, Hamlet tells Horatio what happened on the boat. Smelling something fishy, he snooped through RNG's belongings while they slept and found the letter calling for his death, and surreptitiously replaced it with an identical one calling for their deaths instead. In the meantime, Claudius and Laertes hatch a plot. Laertes will challenge Hamlet to a fencing match and use a foil with a poisoned tip. As backup, just in case Hamlet is the better fighter,
Claudius will poison a goblet of wine meant for Hamlet. While the entire court of Denmark is packed into the state hall to witness the fight, the army of Fortinbras, fresh off their victories in Poland and containing the greatest special ops soldiers 19th century Scandinavia can provide, attacks without their knowledge. As the duel begins, Hamlet has the upper hand and wins the first few points. And his mother celebrates by grabbing his cup, raising a toast, and taking a sip. As she collapses, Laertes successfully swipes Hamlet with his poisoned blade. But the toxin takes its time with him. The fight escalates, Gertrude lays dying, and in the chaos, Hamlet and Laertes switch weapons. Now Hamlet strikes back with the same deadly blade. Laertes, seeing Gertrude dying on the floor, knowing both he and Hamlet are doomed, has a moment of clarity. The king's to blame. Claudius, coward that he is, tries to run, but Hamlet throws his sword like a javelin and pins Claudius to the throne. He runs up to him and forces him to down the rest of the poisoned wine. Laertes, with the last of his breath, says to Hamlet, "Hey man, I won't blame you if you won't blame me. Cool?" Hamlet agrees. Fortinbras, by now having broached the palace doors, calmly makes his way towards the state hall. Hamlet realizes he only has minutes to live, and Horatio, loyal to the very end, is all like, "I'm gonna come with you, bro." But Hamlet's like, "No, bro. Someone's gotta tell the story, bro. Everyone else is dead, bro. Also tell Fortinbras the throne is his." Hamlet dies. Horatio mourns. Fortinbras steps into the hall, bewildered by the corpses of the entire royal family laid before him. He thought he'd have to do a lot more work. Horatio tells him the tale of his best bud, and Fortinbras, as a sign of respect, has him buried with honor. The end. Also, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead!
Okay, now that you're all caught up, let's talk about the game. Hamlet, a murder mystery, is split into two parts, aptly named To Be and Not To Be. Not To Be is the strictly educational component of the disc. It contains the full text of the play along with commentary by the game's Shakespeare advisor Arlene Steeble and a digital library of books of lore which contain historical information on the world of Shakespeare and Hamlet on such topics as games, fatherhood, religion, and cosmology. Usually when you buy a Shakespeare book, they tend to come with little bonus articles on the play to help set context. There's just been so much scholarship on the subject that they're handing these things out for free, and the game follows this tradition beautifully. It integrates all this extra information well. Not To Be isn't just some separate boring classroom. Much of the knowledge within these digital pages is required to solve the puzzles in the game, so it is accessible at any point from the menu. To Be is the game, in which you get to be Prince Hamlet himself. It's a highly linear trip through the movie in which you change certain crucial events through solving puzzles and partaking in other challenges. The film's sets are accurately recreated in 360-degree 3D panoramas and occasionally pictures of real locations. Puzzles are sometimes logic-based, sometimes require you to dive into the books of lore, and sometimes aren't puzzles at all. The music is taken from the original motion picture score by Patrick Doyle, which unfortunately means I have to mute it for the video, with some additional pieces composed and performed by Jean-Pierre Isbouts himself. The sound design is a bit all over the place though, as there are lots of moments of absolute silence which could use a backing track or at least some ambient sounds. The environments are rendered with pretty good detail for the mid-90s, the interface fits in with the overall look, and you even get Resident Evil style door transitions. The castle is entirely devoid of people to interact with. Makes it feel really empty? Yes, but also it's rather dreamlike. These kinds of 90s 3D renderings live and die by their art design, and in that sense the people at Pantheon kept everything remarkably coherent. Navigation, however, is a little inscrutable. Helpful text hints are hidden behind menus, and the only real indication on what you need to do next is provided by video or voice clips from the film, or the occasional tip from Hamlet's guide through the game, Renaissance Man.
Fie, and shame upon you. One more chance I give you before the Danish crown is lost.
There is no free exploration of Elsinore Castle, which is in some ways a blessing because you can't get lost at all, and the next goal is always behind whatever one door is interactable, but the way Branagh designed the castle interiors in the film, full of hidden doors and compartments, made it almost a character unto itself, especially the State Hall, lined with mirrors that are also doors to individual rooms, from private offices to the padded cell they keep Ophelia in, which then also becomes a theater, a throne room, and a fencing training ground. It all works to the game's benefit in making it a curious place to explore, and that's exactly it. You can't really. As it is, the game railroads you pretty strongly. You can fail a puzzle, but you'll just get rebuked and given another chance. Sometimes you're just dropped in a room without any real clue what you need to do, and the often entirely recontextualized video or voice clips are of no help, so you either wave the mouse around until you find an interactable zone, or you access the More Help screen from the pause menu, which will give you instructions. You can also go to your bookshelf at any time by hitting space to access the books of lore. The saving system is very cumbersome. I suppose I should be happy to have a save system at all, but the only way to save your progress is by exiting the game entirely. Quitting the game after every puzzle just to save really interrupts the momentum and mood. Now, it is of course not strictly necessary to do that, and the game isn't particularly long, but I have enough experience trying to run old PC games to know a single electron has to go down the wrong series of tubes for a random crash to happen at any Well, there we go. Pantheon, of course, was not strictly a game developer, and during these early years, user interface conventions for adventure games hadn't really solidified yet, much in the same way that English writing conventions hadn't solidified yet in the time of Shakespeare. If we can forgive him, we can forgive Pantheon. For reasons that will become clear later, I'm now gonna run through the entire game. It'll spoil the plot, such as it is, but I'll try to avoid revealing puzzle solutions wherever I can. If you really want to remain unspoiled, a time code will appear on screen now. Clicking on the palace gates on the main menu will start the to be portion of the game.
Welcome. You have chosen to be Hamlet, Prince of Denmark.
You enter the palace and can click on the map to listen to a bit of the politics of the whole situation.
Our last king, whose image even but now appeared to us, was, as you know, by Fortinbras of Norway, thereto pricked on by a most emulate pride, dared to the combat.
Then you enter the expansive and many-mirrored State Hall, the main place of action in the movie, and click on the throne to watch Claudius yap about some more stuff.
Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green, yet so far hath discretion fought with nature.
Then, since the floor of the State Hall seems built for it, you play a quick game of chess. The goal, of course, is to take out the king. You then go through one of the many mirror doors and listen to Horatio and the guards tell you about the ghostly apparition they witnessed.
2 nights together had these gentlemen, Marcellus and Bernardo, on their watch in the dead wasteland middle of the night, been thus encountered. A figure like your father.
In this same room you find a secret door with a staircase up to the Royal Observatory, and it's here that the structure of the game is revealed to you. You are confronted with Renaissance Man, a disembodied voice here represented by a golden Vitruvian man statue. He explains to you that in order to escape a bloody fate, you must gather the 10 wits of man, based on the actual Elizabethan concept of the 5 inward and 5 outward wits, so you can become whole and save the day. Although the game is entirely linear and there is no free exploration, the observatory thematically serves as a kind of hub for Hamlet. There's even a bookshelf here with some reading material for you. Here you get the next puzzle, which takes the form of a puzzle. Solve it to get the map of Elsinore Palace, which isn't really functional in any sense but helps you understand where exactly you are in relation to the story. You then leave the observatory and return to the State Hall, where you're tasked with picking the correct letter for Claudius to send to Old Norway to tell him to force Fortinbras to back off.
In that and all things will we show our duty. We doubted nothing. Heartily farewell.
Then you wander through the woods a bit until you are confronted by the ghost!
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
And you listen to him whisper his story to you and thus acquire 2 important things. First, the wit of instinct, and second, the explicit instruction to make sure that no one else should die in your quest. That's essentially what this is, a big what-if story with one minor change. What if the ghost of King Hamlet said, No collateral damage, please, to his son. Hamlet's still gonna put on his antic disposition, though. Next, a little peeping. You spy on Polonius asking his man Reynaldo to spy on Laertes when he returns to France. Then you witness Ophelia coming to her father about Hamlet behaving like a weirdo.
But as you did command, I did repel his letters and denied his access to me.
Now, the play doesn't show Hamlet doing this, so the film doesn't show Hamlet doing this, so it makes sense that the game doesn't show Hamlet doing this. But I've always found the transition between Hamlet deciding to act mad and Ophelia running to Polonius in tears to be remarkably sudden. The spying continues with you peeping on Claudius welcoming Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to the palace, and then you're back in the State Hall receiving the letter about Fortinbras having been told to chill the F out. As you can kind of tell with the lack of puzzles, this is the info dump part of the game. The building of the dramatic tension before stuff really pops off. And it continues with the conversation between Claudius and Gertrude about Hamlet's behavior.
I doubt it is no other but the main, his father's death and our hasty marriage.
But soft! What puzzle through yonder side room breaks? It's a doozy. This is the Wheel of Life, in which you must correctly assign humors and tempers and related attributes to 4 characters. Hamlet, Horatio, Laertes, and Marcellus? That Marcellus? Alright. This puzzle is of course entirely impossible to solve without familiarity with these characters, which is something that sadly the game doesn't really provide to you. So if you don't know who is melancholy and who is plump, best start reading that full text of the play. You do get a book of lore about which humors and tempers coincide with which elements. I thought this puzzle was glitched and broken for several long minutes until I realized the game wants you to click outside of the circles in order to sort the quadrants. Also, please enjoy this fantastic sound effect. Then you enter the hedge maze, which is a pretty simple click until you find the right order affair. You'll hear pieces of the to be or not to be speech split into chunks as you make your way through. In the center of the maze you witness the details of Daddy Hamlet's murder, confirming Claudius as the killer and ironically earning you the wit of hearing. I suppose this is the first real deviation of the plot, since originally Hamlet stages the play to see how Claudius reacts. You then meet with Gilden Roses and get presented with one of the game's most complex yet rewarding puzzles. You are provided with some flowery Shakespearean text giving you clues as to who arrived when, from which direction, and with which gift. And you're gonna have to bring out a notepad to figure it all out. This is a proper logic puzzle, and the text being in Elizabethan English only makes it trickier to decipher, though you can hover over the individual lines to get a modern English translation. Solving this one gives you the wit of imagination. Now hover over the mirrors to see characters of famous theatrical productions and operas like La Gioconda, Faust, and Shakespeare's own Falstaff. The play's the thing, which is to say one of these characters appears in the play within the play that Hamlet stages to catch Claudius. You enter what I suppose is Elsinore's rather gaudily decorated game room. Here the Player King challenges you to a game of cards.
Can you play?
Oh, aye, my lord.
Please consult your Book of Gaming. No, not that one. No, not that one. Not that one either. Come on, the one in the game. Honestly, though the book gives rules of a card game, I'm not even sure if you can lose this one. I won right away without even really knowing what I was doing. The next challenge is the opposite. It feels impossible to solve. Essentially, you have to recreate 3 scenes from the film by picking from a selection of a dozen small clips. I'll be perfectly honest, I watched the film days before playing the game, and I could not do it from memory. The clips are just tiny thumbnails and it's hard to understand exactly what the game wants from you here. But all this frustration is almost offset by the world's tiniest Judi Dench appearance. Look, there she is! After the play you follow Claudius into the chapel confessional, and here it is. Your moment. Your chance. You can do what movie Hamlet didn't dare, and shove that dagger right into your dear old uncle's ear and avenge your father while avoiding any further bloodshed, right? Wrong.
The target of thy wrath is Claudius. But first you must face the threat of Norway to stem the wrath of Fortinbras, lest you win the battle with Claudius, but forever lose the Danish crown. Now go and undo thy ghastly deed.
Well, that, and it would be an exceedingly short game if Claudius died now. Then you go confront your mother, but you hear a stirring from the curtains. A rat! It's rats! Stab them without hurting the mysterious figure hiding behind the curtain. Look, On the one hand, it's interesting to have a bit of an arcadey section instead of another puzzle, but this is almost sacrilegious? The stabbing of Polonius is one of the most dramatic and shocking scenes in the play, and here it's essentially a comedic moment. It's also a drastic alteration from the original plot that should have massive reverberations. Anyway, I suppose Polonius scurried off like a little rat himself, because after getting rid of Gertrude's little rodent problem, he's nowhere to be found. You can then inspect some items in the Queen's chambers until you turn off the light and the ghost appears to Hamlet, still telling him to quit dilly-dallying and get the damn thing over with. It gives you the wit of sight. Next you have the confrontation with Ophelia. This moment is kind of framed by the game as if Hamlet is having a sort of vision of where his behavior will lead, but it also actually still happens, and messes with the timeline a bit. Ophelia runs away. To find her, the game presents you with a kind of precursor to strange horticulture. You have to read one of the books of lore to get up to date on your knowledge of flowers and herbs, and then collect them in the garden so you can post them off to the right characters. Unfortunately, there's not much of a challenge to this, just click whatever is interactable until your basket is full. I suppose what the game is saying here is that Ophelia has still lost her mind, even though Polonius is alive and well, so you have to search for her in the woods before the unthinkable happens. Along the water, you get a screen that is basically a hidden object game, which reminds me of another game based on a movie based on a book. Shutter Island. Yes, it's real, and I've played it. In fact, I own it! Anyway, this entire sequence with Ophelia shows that this game requires a bit of imagination to interpret. Very little of it is spelled out for you, but also very little of it will make sense unless you connect it to the events of the film. Congratulations. You now have the wit of smell.
Therefore prepare thyself. The bark is ready and the wind had helped, the associates tend, and everything is bent for England.
For England?
I am.
Good.
So is it, if thou knewst our purpose.
I see a cherub that sees them. But come, for England, farewell, dear mother.
Thy loving father, Hamlet.
My mother, father, and mother is man and wife. Man and wife is one flesh, so... My mother.
Claudius puts Hamlet on the boat to England, and it's return of the Obra Dinn time. You sneak past the snoring MC Krantz and DJ Stern, so you can modify the letter Claudius meant to sentence you to death with. Since the plot is that no one but Claudius should die, you modify the letter a little extra so that your friends will only get imprisoned instead of straight up executed. Fine. Then you take command of the boat to avoid pirates, because Hamlet is nothing if not multi-talented. Now back in Denmark, you meet Horatio at the cemetery and encounter the gravedigger, who, not recognizing Hamlet, speaks of the young prince who got sent to England for losing his wits.
Mary, why was he sent into England?
Why? Because he was mad. He shall recover his wits there, or if he do not, there's no great matter there.
Why?
It will not be seen in him there. There the men are as mad as hay.
And that must be where Pantheon got the idea from for Hamlet having to collect all the wits, and I think it's pretty clever. Anyway, the puzzle here is to match triplets of pictographs on some tombstones, and just like To Be or Not To Be was cut up into hedge maze, here you'll hear more of Hamlet's famous lines.
Alas, poor Yorick, fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy.
At a nearby mausoleum, Renaissance Man tasks you with getting Rosencrantz and Guildenstern freed from the English prison you condemned them to. Okay, I guess. This one is pretty cool too. I enjoy a good word puzzle. Actually, this reminds me of another game based on a movie based on a book. The Da Vinci Code. Yes, it's real and I've played it. In fact, I own it. Beneath the mausoleum, you make your way through a kind of purgatory, in which the "My thoughts be bloody" soliloquy is recontextualized a bit since Hamlet never encountered Fortinbras's army. He resolves to take action. It's a rousing speech performed excellently by Kenneth Branagh in the film, with a dramatic zoom out showing the army marching over a snowy landscape. But it doesn't really work as well in the game, since you've already spent the entirety of it taking action and have by this point prevented the needless deaths of at least 4 people. Regardless, Renaissance Man tells you it's time to reconcile with Fortinbras, thus avoiding that uncomfortable moment where he invades the palace. You write him a nice letter promising to return all his lost territory and mean to deliver this by the traditional manner. Crossbow. It's a very simple, very clunky minigame that is far too frustrating for its limited complexity. It took me a while to hit the target right, though I like that you get little inserts of your arrow hitting a tree trunk or the side of a tent. Having taken care of the Norwegian problem, you have now reached the end game. You spy on Claudius convincing Laertes to challenge Hamlet to a fencing duel, and this is another place where everything just feels so weird. Laertes has never been a big fan of Hamlet, if only for banging his sister, but at this point in the game's version of events, both Polonius and Ophelia are alive and well, so he has no reason to want him dead. The scene is edited around a bit, cutting out entirely the part about Laertes poisoning his fencing blade, and Claudius doesn't mention his own plan to poison the wine at all. So how does Hamlet find out about Claudius's plot? Well, you explore his suite and find some letters on his desk, including one from the royal apothecary about preparing another flask of poison. It seems the king's weapon of choice is henbane. You go to the observatory to read a book on plants and poisons by Friar Lawrence, a nice little nod to Romeo and Juliet, to figure out what the antidote is, and then do a little Breaking Bad to concoct it. In the State Hall, you are presented with some fancy decorated goblets, and you must use several hints to pick the right one to drop the antidote into. Take too long, and Mommy Gertrude takes a fatal sip.
Gertrude! Do not drink.
I will, my lord. I pray you pardon me.
It is the poison cup.
Forget to apply the antidote, and it is you who is doomed.
You have drunk from the poisoned cup without applying the antidote. You have been warned. Do not harm the innocent. Therefore, harm not yourself either.
Anyway, finding the right goblet should be pretty easy if you've been paying attention or can quote the entirety of Hamlet verbatim from memory. And then it's time for the fencing match. It's you versus Laertes. Mano a mano. You can pick your blade in the beginning, and I'm not sure if it matters, but either way it'll take you a minute to figure out how the game works, and I had more success with the leftmost one. So, click on your rival's sword when he attacks to block, and then on the little heart on his chest to attack. Get enough points, and you win. It's another very clunky minigame, and even though it's not a puzzle, but another arcadey bit, kind of an anticlimax in what otherwise should be a very exciting moment. In the film, Hamlet and Laertes really throw down, climbing up the stairs to the State Hall's second level and smashing each other through glass. Here in the game, you just click semi-randomly until you win. To be fair, nobody could make Dark Souls in Macromedia Director, and the way Pantheon edited clips of the crowd's reaction to the battle into the game helped set the mood. As soon as you hit the points threshold, you're immediately, and I do mean immediately, shown the moment Hamlet thrusts his foil at Claudius. It is shockingly abrupt and barely makes sense within the flow of the game. But anyway, you did it! Hamlet wins! In a stark contrast to the original text, Claudius is the only one dead at the end, old King Hamlet's ghost presumably gets released from purgatory, Hamlet gets to finally sit down, now himself the king, in what is a cleverly reappropriated alternate take from the film's opening State Hall scene, and everybody claps. Especially this guy. The end. So that is what happens in Hamlet, a Murder Mystery. See how easy it is to prevent a horrible tragedy? All you really need is your wits. And a disembodied voice with the power to rewind time telling you exactly what to do.
Hello dear Alien Pop Video viewer. Are you tired of the modern internet? Are you looking for a place where you can discuss games, media, your life, and anything without big tech breathing down your neck? A place with old school internet vibes, but based on modern open source software? A place with signatures, gifts, chat rooms, and a zero-tolerance policy for bigotry? Then join us at the _, an old-school forum with a modern twist.
I would like to compare, and perhaps even contrast, Hamlet, a Murder Mystery to some of its contemporaries. Games that it bears some resemblance to. Games like The Seventh Guest, which was released in 1993 and is, along with Myst, one of the OG cinematic adventure games using the spacious compact disc read-only memory format to provide you with an interactive environment filled with videos and sound clips. In this case, the full motion video is relegated to the 3D rendered environments, and the recorded actors are basically cutout clips overlaid on top of it.
I'll show you mine, if you show me yours.
Now, I have spent literal decades exploring and interacting with detailed real-time 3D spaces, and I'd wager so have you, so it might be difficult to grasp just how revolutionary this was. Sure, Doom also came out in 1993 and its environments are rendered in real time, but as smarter people than me have pointed out, the environments in the game aren't really at all representative of real spaces. They're these abstract geometric volumes with the occasional hint of computer or industry. But here's the seventh guest with an entire mansion to explore, full of detail and moody lighting and little cutout animated gifs of ghosts. It's a shame that all there is to do in the game is to attempt to solve increasingly infuriating puzzles while begrudgingly tolerating this downright silly story presentation.
Come with us now! Let me go!
There's something wrong with her.
Nevertheless, I cannot deny the historical significance of the game, and strictly speaking, as a game where you wander around a location and solve puzzles, Hamlet: A Murder Mystery is very similar to it. And also superior in every way. Another game that is similar to Hamlet is Versailles 1685, a 1996 graphic adventure game by prolific French studio Cryo Interactive, responsible for such gems as Dune and such horrible dreck as Dune.
Did you have one of those wakening dreams?
Mother, I know we've already talked briefly of these visions. Don't you think it's high time you filled me in?
Versailles compares to Hamlet in two crucial ways. First, you're presented with a palace to explore. Guess which one? Though unlike Hamlet, there is more freedom of exploration to it, though it is limited per chapter. But you can actually get lost in the sheer monumentality of it. Second, it's also a game that relishes the opportunity to be educational. Since it's based on actual historical people, nearly all of them have a paragraph or two explaining their role in the royal palace. Rooms are recreated with a high degree of accuracy, down to the paintings that actually adorned them in the late 1600s. I think it succeeds at integrating the gameplay and educational components better than Hamlet, and the production value of the entire thing seems quite high, character animation notwithstanding. I also want to quickly compare Hamlet to one of my favorite cinematic adventure games, Titanic: Adventure Out of Time. Unrelated to James Cameron's film, but much more interesting. Like Versailles, it's a remarkably faithful recreation of a real historical place, or vehicle, that you can explore at your leisure. At least before the iceberg hits, and very seamlessly integrates its story and educational components. You even get an entirely separate mode where you can freely wander around the ship outside of the main story and have characters from the game act as tour guides. The characters aren't strictly videos, but it's an aesthetic and animation style that I just adore, and I'd love it if some talented indie developers would copy it. Most importantly, like Hamlet, there's a fencing minigame. They seem about equal in their complexity, but I just thought it was a funny coincidence. And last, and also least, there is the Book of Watermarks, a Japan-only PS1 game. I gave it a shot because it takes elements from Shakespeare's The Tempest, but I was very disappointed by it. First of all, the links to The Tempest are only notional. Here's a sorcerer called Prospero stuck on an island, and you play as a character called Ferdinand, and that's pretty much it. No Ariel, no Caliban, not even a Tempest, really. Now, it's possible more of that stuff pops up later in the story, but I honestly couldn't play much of it. I know it's gotten a bit of a reappraisal in recent years as an arty game for adults, but it was released in 1999 in an ocean of mist-likes that had already dried up by that point. And it's just extraordinarily tedious to control. Movement through the environments, which again don't look much better than the games from 1993, is excruciatingly slow. And the puzzles, which aren't great, often require moving around. So by the time your player character reaches the next statue or whatever, you've already forgotten which symbol you're meant to place beneath it. I don't really care so much that it doesn't aim to be a faithful adaptation of The Tempest, even though it's one of my favorite of Shakespeare's works, but the gameplay is just so tedious and boring, and the super artsy cinematics with veteran actor Jack Donner as Prospero, or the new age soundtrack by Enya's sister Moya Brennan do nothing to compensate for this. I could go on forever, but that's it for the comparisons. I think Hamlet sits firmly in the middle of these, to be honest. Book of Watermarks you can ignore entirely, and the seventh guest might be interesting to explore as a historical artifact, but don't do it without a guide handy. The setting of Versailles doesn't really appeal to me personally, but I can tell it's a game full of depth and intrigue. and Titanic Adventure Out of Time is one of my favorite games of all time, and you should definitely try it out. But this is not a video about any of those. We're here for Hamlet, and now that we have some context, I have a fundamental question I've been meaning to ask about the game. Does Hamlet, a murder mystery, work? The way movie tie-in games function, they rely on familiarity with the original property, but still have to exist as a separate product. Sometimes this works spectacularly. GoldenEye 007 is remembered for far more than its connection to the film and the James Bond franchise as a whole. You could erase the movie from existence and it would still be very much playable. But on the complete other end of the spectrum, Hamlet cannot and does not stand on its own. Even if you know the play intimately, the game alters the story as told in the film in such a way that it would be an utterly bizarre experience of random voice and movie clips if you hadn't watched it before. Yes, the full text of the play is available on the disc, with commentary, but reading Shakespeare is nowhere near the same as watching Shakespeare being performed, and playing this game without having seen the film would just make you feel utterly lost. I also think the subtitle of A Murder Mystery sets certain expectations. While you can argue that, if you look really closely, Hamlet is a murder mystery in the sense that Hamlet doesn't know for sure the ghost is speaking the truth until he traps Claudius with the play, the murder mystery is a well-defined literary genre that Hamlet, by and large, is not a part of. The murder mystery also denotes a type of game, of the video variety or not, that this game isn't. You're not solving a mystery. There's no detective work happening. At no point are you pressing X to doubt. I'm not really saying this as a point of criticism, it's just something that bothers me in particular, someone who tends to overthink things, as the length of this video will attest. But the educational value in the not to be part of the game is undeniable. Not just the fully commented text of the play, but the information provided in the books of lore add fascinating insight into the world of Hamlet. And because they're a vital component of solving so many of the puzzles, you can't avoid learning things. I kinda love that the game continues the tradition of packaging works of Shakespeare with scholarship. There's a nice variety in the puzzles, and they don't just require you to engage in the literature, but are at times devious and clever. Not always, but at times. In spite of coming out of an interactive history multimedia CD-ROM studio, this is in all ways that matters a proper video game. It all ties together in what is, in the end, a solid interactive gaming experience. And yet, in a way that also highlights its greatest flaw, I think. I like the game. I think it's a good game. It's certainly a fascinating crossover of worlds. Right up my alley. It works better as a cinematic adventure than The Seventh Guest. It is a far better Shakespeare adaptation than The Book of Watermarks. But as an adaptation, not just of the play but also the movie, it's rather clinical, dry, dare I say, academic. The game serves not so much as an interpretation of Hamlet, the play and the film, but merely as a complement to it. It wears the dress of a game, and it wears it well, but does nothing with the characters. It adds nothing to the plot other than, what if everyone lived though? Earlier I asked if changing the story by letting Polonius live was sacrilegious. It might be to some, but I don't really care. Hamlet, or any Shakespeare, or any piece of fiction or media or art period, as the legacy of the creativity of the mind, can be changed and modified however anyone wishes. I've heard the argument that one of the things that makes Shakespeare so popular is that it is eminently adaptable. Some years after Branagh, Hamlet got another film adaptation set in the modern day, with Ethan Hawke as the prince, Kyle MacLachlan as Claudius, and Bill Murray as Polonius. I don't know if it's any good, but I am curious as to how they updated the story to a business setting, with Elsinore having been replaced by a skyscraper. In the 1930s, Orson Welles, at that point barely in his 20s, famously directed a stage rendition of Macbeth with an all-black cast, moving the events to the Caribbean and replacing Scottish witchcraft with Haitian voodoo. It was an enormous success. Adaptation, modification, and inspiration are ways that humans can channel the things already created by other humans to modernize them, express different elements of them either artistically or politically, or use them to say something new entirely. Hamlet itself borrows from concepts and themes that had already been circulating for hundreds of years. Great art passes through the human mind and creates great art, which then continues to speak to us across generations. It doesn't even have to be great art. But what exactly does Hamlet, a Murder Mystery say? Don't get me wrong, the game is art. It is the concerted effort of people making something fascinating and creative and, in its own ways, wondrous. Jean-Pierre Isbouts is a historian and a filmmaker, not a writer of fiction, and his goal was never to make some kind of deep analysis of Shakespeare or a singular elaborate self-analyzing adaptation of Branagh's Hamlet, but to make an interactive complement to a movie that rewards the player for engaging with it while making do with the footage, budget, and time that they were provided. And it's not like Branagh filmed Hamlet on green screens that could be used to more seamlessly integrate the characters into the game. But that's exactly the thing. Hamlet is a play about characters. Branagh's Hamlet is a film about characters. Hamlet, a murder mystery, is in no way a game about characters. And in that, I see it as a missed opportunity. The setup of the game is that we have a Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, who for reasons that are not explained is not indecisive, but instead determined and enlightened by the potential consequences of his actions. One could interpret the Renaissance man almost as his conscience, reminding him that if he is to succeed at his goals, he must approach things more carefully and strategically. Okay, cool. And Hamlet is the kind of story where you can see the doom of its characters coming from the very beginning. It starts with the arrival of a ghost. You know it's a tragedy. You know there will not be a happy ending. It is a train wreck happening in slow motion. You watch these characters and you kind of fall in love with them because Shakespeare gives them so much depth and you keep seeing them make mistake after mistake. And the power of the story comes from you wishing that if just one person, any person, made one decision differently, this whole family could be spared from annihilation. And we see this kind of wish popping up time and again in fiction. Could you prevent such a fate with enough foresight or intuition? Is your destiny truly your destiny? Hamlet is a play that's very much about this question, and honestly I think it's brilliant to take this angle with it for a game, and it's an angle that could work for many of Shakespeare's other tragedies. What if Macbeth had some backbone? What if Romeo and Juliet were able to just escape and live happily ever after? What if Hamlet could just get rid of Claudius and be king? Big questions, with a quantum multiverse of answers that each spiral off into infinite more what-ifs that all have exciting narrative and gameplay potential. Hamlet, a murder mystery, does this, but only on a technical level. The Hamlet you play as gets his revenge, but spares everyone else, and becomes king, and even makes friends with Fortinbras. Not because he saw what was to come and grabbed the steering wheel of fate and slammed it hard into the other direction, but because a disembodied paternal voice with no real identity just tells him what to do. There's nothing you really learn about Hamlet's character, no insight gained, no interpretation provided. The player is just following a script, one that technically has more payoff. But there's no drama to it. You do not inhabit the role of Hamlet. You do not grab the steering wheel of fate and fight against the forces of destiny. This is not to say that the game is bad or not worth playing. I just believe games are on the same level as theater and film and the written word and any other artistic medium in their ability to deliver compelling narratives. And while the Branagh film succeeds in standing alongside the play, the game does not stand alongside the film in the same way. That just disappoints me a bit, I suppose. Yet Hamlet, a murder mystery, is a remarkable achievement. Remember, this is an educational CD-ROM that somehow mutated into a full-fledged game. The people at Pantheon Productions were able to craft this out of movie clips in a way that changes the outcome of the story and somehow remains mostly consistent. That is no easy feat, and I commend everyone who worked on it for this accomplishment. As a game, it works. As an educational tool both on its own and a companion to the film, it works. Hamlet, a murder mystery, is at its strongest when you have to engage with the written content to solve a puzzle, like when you have to formulate an antidote to the poison. It does something only games can do. It lets you absorb yourself into the world of Hamlet in a way that the movie and the play and the text do not and cannot. It utilizes the multimedia potential of games to its fullest capacity, letting you simulate doing research and apply that research in a way that has consequences. Though I would not rely on these texts to help you make actual poison antidotes. Hamlet on the Holodeck is a book released by digital media scholar Janet Murray in 1997, the same year as our Hamlet game. In it, she uses Captain Janeway's romantic Victorian adventures on the holodeck of the Federation starship Voyager as a lens through which she analyzes the past and future of digital narrative. Hamlet: A Murder Mystery is of course not referenced in the book, but it's not mentioned in the updated 2016 edition either. In fact, Hamlet doesn't play much of a role at all in her text. It's just nicely alliterative with the word holodeck. Murray does a thorough job going through the history of digital narrative, from basic chatbots to multi-user dungeons, ties it into immersive art experience and the expansive hypertext narratives that were all the rage in the nascent 90s World Wide Web. She makes an attempt at categorizing the components of digital narrative and makes a play at predicting the future of interactive stories. Does a decent job at it too, I must say, although it comes across as maybe a bit overly optimistic. In the book, Murray asks, and I quote, "What will it take for authors to create rich and satisfying stories that exploit the characteristic properties of digital environments and deliver the aesthetic pleasures the new medium seems to promise us?" Nearly 30 years later, with all the developments that interactive narrative has undergone, all the graphical advancements, the increasing accessibility of authoring tools like Twine or GB Studio or Godot or even Downpour, which lets you make little games and stories from the comfort of your own phone, and the proliferation of novel modes of interaction like motion controls and VR, we still can't give a true answer to this question, can we? In part, this is because some of these developments are happening so fast we can barely get a grip on them, and I would argue, in part because the industrial and market forces that dominate the medium as it exists right now stifle experimentation and free artistic development. She mentions primitive chatbots like Eliza a couple of times, and though this writing predated the rise of the large language model chatbot by 25 entire years, she was still remarkably prescient about its usefulness in telling stories. Quote, "A story is an act of interpretation of the world, rooted in the particular perception and feelings of the writer. There is no mechanical way to substitute for this, and no reason to want to do so." Or, as one William Shakespeare put it about 400 years earlier in a little play called Hamlet,
"My words fly up, my thoughts remain below. Words without thoughts never to heaven go."
Anyway, if the history and or future of digital narratives is a subject that interests you, Hamlet on the Holodeck is pretty much required reading, though I think it's also open to plenty of criticism from a number of angles. But the title of the book emphasizes that Shakespeare's body of work is one of those cultural artifacts that will be remembered for as long as there are human beings to remember them, maybe even longer. You can barely engage with culture without encountering just a Hamlet reference around every corner, whether in classical art, or in a game released as part of a clinical trial to help teenagers stick with their cancer medication.
Foul deeds will arise, though all the earth overwhelm them to men's eyes.
That's Remission, by the way. I did a whole video on it. You should watch that one next. Big Willie Shaxford retired to Stratford in the early 1610s as the bubonic plague ravaged London and made stage plays less profitable. He died in 1616 at the age of 52, possibly from partying too hard with some of his writer buddies, and was buried with a curse etched on his grave, as if he wasn't already legendary enough. He was considered an equal among his contemporaries and was well remembered by his friends, some of whom gathered all his works and published a definitive collection in 1623 we now refer to as the First Folio. Stage drama in England suffered some significant challenges in the middle of the 17th century, which was a little busy with a couple civil wars, the public beheading of King Charles I, and a period of Puritan rule leading to the closure of all the theatres in London and even the demolition of Shakespeare's famous Globe Theatre. As things settled down at the end of that century, theatres opened up again and interest in Shakespeare wasn't just revived, but he was almost immediately elevated as the playwright of his age. That consensus hasn't changed much since, and now here we are. If I listed all the directing, writing, acting, and producer credits of Kenneth Branagh on both stage and film and said them really fast, this video would still be an extra 60 minutes long. Post-Hamlet acting highlights include racist steampunk aficionado Dr. Arliss Lovelace in Wild Wild West, Miguel in The Road to El Dorado, and scientist Niels Bohr in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. As a filmmaker, he returned to Shakespeare a few more times with Love's Labour's Lost, As You Like It, and playing the bard himself in All Is True.
Yes, I do think women should be allowed to perform the female roles, as is the practice on the continent now.
Reception and success are all over the place, from big-budget mainstream stuff like Marvel's Thor and absolute disasters like Artemis Fowl, but also triumphs like the semi-autobiographical Belfast, which finally got him an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Hamlet is still one of his top-tier films, but you've got to admire someone willing to try anything. I honestly hadn't paid much attention to Branagh's career before starting work on this video, but now I'm definitely more interested in checking out some of his high points. And low points.
Well, General, it's been a long journey from New Liberty.
Pantheon Productions released just 2 more CD-ROMs after Hamlet. 1997's Night Cafe was a collaboration with M Interactive set in the Montmartre area of Paris, all about the many renowned artists who lived there at the end of the 19th century. While still somewhat game-like in the sense that access to many of its features is gated by puzzles and other activities, it doesn't really compare to Hamlet, a murder mystery in its structure, being more explicitly an educational multimedia product. The vibes are pretty immaculate though. Night Cafe was followed in 1998 by Walt Disney, An Intimate History of the Man and His Magic, a multimedia encyclopedia produced in collaboration with the Disney family. This would be the last CD-ROM produced by Pantheon, as Jean-Pierre Isbouts pivoted back to filmmaking, writing, and academia, and has become quite prolific himself, having written a number of books on subjects such as the life of the historical Jesus and the archaeology of the Bible, and profiles on Leonardo da Vinci and Salvador Dali. His collaboration with Disney was leveraged into directing the official biographical documentary Walt, the Man Behind the Myth, and he has recently been directing and hosting educational programs for streaming service The Great Courses Plus. Dr. Isbouts was kind enough to answer some questions I had that shed light on the development and production process of the game. He considers himself many things: scholar, filmmaker, writer. I suppose he doesn't really think of himself as a game designer, but I can say with full authority that he did a fine job of it with Hamlet. He is currently a professor in human development at Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara, California. My full interview with him will be added to my behind-the-scenes post-video article on my Patreon. Now, let's say you've just watched this very long video, you're planning half a day to watch the even much longer film, and you think to yourself, you know what, I bet I'm clever enough to save the Court of Elsinore. How do you play Hamlet, a murder mystery? Don't bother looking for a physical copy. It's a fairly rare game, and they're out there but not reasonably priced. I got very, very lucky with mine, but that's just because the gods smile upon me. Do not pay an eBay seller $300 for a sealed big box copy, and definitely never pay anyone for a massively overpriced graded version. That's just a scam. Get the ISO from the Internet Archive or your abandonware site of choice. However you get it, I am sad to say Hamlet, a Murder Mystery, or HAM, as the cool kids call it, will not play on your modern computer. In fact, you shouldn't even try to install it on your modern computer, because some cursory research indicated to me that the Motion Pixels codec may permanently screw up things on modern Windows in a way that requires manually diving into the registry to clean things up. And even if it didn't, modern Windows will not understand how to play the video clips anyway. I played it on Windows 98 in a virtual machine, specifically PCM, and it worked just fine. Had only a single crash happen. If virtual machines are as inscrutable to you as early modern English in blank verse, our good friends at the Collection Chamber have helpfully packaged the game into an installer that runs Windows 95 within DOSBox. Easiest way to get the game running by far. As always, the link is in the description. I'd say the game is about as lengthy as the film, give or take about an hour depending on your puzzle solving abilities. In case you get stuck, the game will let you skip puzzles entirely, but also there is a walkthrough available on an archived page of the Just Adventure website. You'll find this in the description too. Is this not another great candidate for a modern update? It doesn't need a full-on remaster, I think, but if The Seventh Guest can get a virtual reality remake, surely we can make Hamlet, a Murder Mystery, the official game companion to the widely praised Kenneth Branagh masterpiece, playable for today's audience? Night Dive, are you listening? The homunculus wearing the mummified skin of Acclaim, can you be of any use? Before my video on the Desperate Housewives game came out, it had low double-digit votes on the GOG Dream List, and as of the time of writing it's up to nearly 600. Surely we can make some noise here for Hamlet, right? There, that's another link in the description for you. But wait! There's more! Within the Not To Be section there is a tab labeled Origins. Clicking on this will give you 2 links to 2 papers by the game's Shakespeare advisor Arlene Stiebel. They cannot be accessed from within the game and are not available as separate documents on the disc. They can only be printed. Yeah, you need to have a printer hooked up to be able to read them, and that doesn't really work with a virtual machine. So, that was a bit of a journey for me to figure out how to set up a program to fool my virtual Windows 98 install into printing to a PDF file, and then trying to get those files transferred from the virtual machine to my regular PC. The first document is a 2-pager about the origins and sources of Hamlet, and the second is a more substantial overview about Shakespeare's life and work. I haven't found these available online anywhere else, so for the purposes of archiving and preservation, I have uploaded the PDFs to the Internet Archive, for the study and enjoyment of all. With the actually literally monumental impact William Shakespeare has had on just the concept of storytelling in the Western world, it'd be hard not to point at any game with a story or characters and say it wasn't influenced in some way. Anything with forbidden lovers, revenge, lust for power, fairies, or comical misunderstandings can be considered at least partly Shakespearean. And yet, how many games that are direct adaptations of the works of Shakespeare can you name? Moby Games lists just 19. Now, surely that is not a complete list, but it still underscores how remarkably uncommon they are. And guess what? Out of those 19, 6 are based on Hamlet. One of them is Elsinore, released in 2019 by developer Golden Glitch. A very pretty point-and-click adventure. It has a premise that's not too dissimilar to Hamlet, a murder mystery. You play as Ophelia, stuck in a time loop, tasked with preventing all the death that is yet to come. I think I should check this one out, actually. Another one is Hamlet, or the last game without MMORPG features, shaders, and product placement, released in 2010. This is another point-and-click, very fantastical, very liberal with its adaptation, but it looks cute. I can only speculate why there aren't more Shakespeare games. You can argue it from so many directions. Maybe publishers just aren't interested because Shakespeare's work being in the public domain makes trademarking adaptations unworkable. You could say there's something about the linear nature of literature that makes it difficult to adapt to the interactive medium because it conflicts with the need for player agency, but there's plenty of games based on books. Moby Games counts 119 games inspired by Lovecraft and 84 by Tolkien. I don't think there's anything about Shakespeare that makes his work more unadaptable than Lovecraft or Tolkien. His texts contain as many monsters, as much fantasy, and enough interesting characters and world building that has had no problem inspiring filmmakers. The dialogue-heavy nature of theater scripts makes them easily adaptable, actually. You can put Romeo and Juliet in West Coast America. You can put The Taming of the Shrew in high school. And yes, you can put Hamlet in space. So if they can do it on screen and on stage, what's keeping game makers from doing it? What is the point of friction there? I suppose one could easily spend an entire PhD on this subject, and if you have that position available with funding, hit me up. One thing I am curious about that I haven't been able to find a definitive answer for is if Castle Rock had any other games made out of any of their other media properties around this time. I came across a single reference to a supposed adaptation of their previous Shakespeare outing, Othello, the one with Larry Fishburne in the title role and Kenneth Branagh as Iago, in the Oxford Handbook of Media Psychology from 2013. I have found no other evidence of this game existing though, so I'm guessing the author conflated the Shakespeare play with the board game Othello and its many video game iterations. However, nothing would please me more than to be entirely wrong about this, so if you have evidence of this game existing, tell me in the comments please. Hamlet, a murder mystery, was released by M Interactive and Castle Rock Entertainment in 1997 and just fell into the void. Now, M wasn't a particularly renowned publisher, I hadn't heard of them before this, but you'd think Castle Rock would have some interest in seeing the game succeed. I pride myself on discovering obscure games, and this one was another random one where I was just browsing big box games until I saw Kenneth Branagh's little face on the cover and went, what? This might be the most forgotten game I've covered on this channel so far. In my many hours of research, I have found in total 2 tiny newspaper articles about the game coming out, a handful of references to it in academic papers, 1 walkthrough, and 1 single online review. That is it. Do you know how bad it has to be for me to have to go to Google Scholar to learn about a game? I don't even have full access to most of those papers anyway. I'm sure there's more out there, somewhere, but accurate and relevant public information on Hamlet, a murder mystery is criminally limited. Go ahead and look for footage of the game on YouTube. You're gonna have to do some digging, trust me. One single gameplay clip, 7 minutes and 7 seconds long. On the entirety of YouTube, this website where 300 billion minutes of video is uploaded every hour. My video alone has increased the amount of public footage of this game by like 10 times. Do you understand now why I feel compelled to do what I do? This is an official game of a major motion picture by one of the world's most esteemed film directors, based on one of the most celebrated pieces of literature in the history of the written word, and there is just one short clip of it on the world's largest repository of videos. One! Now sure, the awful state of YouTube search and its continuing degradation as a platform may be hiding more videos, but man, I make these videos because I really enjoy the process of researching and writing and editing. I'm not making much money off of this stuff, but I care about video game history. I like telling these untold stories, but it's starting to feel like what I'm doing, throwing a spotlight on games that have just been forgotten entirely, is actually important. I'm not sure if I'm really equipped to handle this kind of responsibility, but I don't think any game deserves to be this obscure. Just a Wikipedia page or a Moby Games entry isn't enough. In fact, the Moby Games entry doesn't even have the game's credits. Hold on, let me change that real quick. We live in a world of economic uncertainty, public massacres of the innocent, blatant corruption, and the ever-present threat of disease outbreaks. In some ways, this is entirely unprecedented in history, and in other ways, it's not that different from the world Shakespeare lived in. One of my personal philosophies is that all human experience is entirely unique, but at the same time, all human experience is entirely universal. That there is a commonality to our experience, this existence on this planet, that is shared between all human beings alive right now and all who once lived, stretching down to our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago. Storytelling is how that connection is sustained. From the Epic of Gilgamesh, all the way to 1000 Times Resist. William Shakespeare had a gift of being able to capture the human spirit in all its dimensions, with all its flaws and triumphs in a way that still resonates deeply with us right now, many centuries later, to the point where people still invest so much of their time and energy and hearts and souls into making movie adaptations of his plays, into making game adaptations of those movie adaptations, and into making deep dive video essays on the game adaptations of the movie adaptations. I don't think the world economy is going to be bouncing up anytime soon. I don't think the current ongoing massacre will be the last. Corruption may eventually become somewhat less blatant, but will be with us for all time, as will disease. But the upside is that beautiful, resonant works of fiction like Shakespeare's will be with us for all time too, translated into all languages, interpreted through all forms of media, inspiring us, confronting us with our own weaknesses and strengths, giving us insight to what it even means to be human, and changing our worldviews entirely with the power of a single couplet. And the rest, well, the rest is silence.